When you watch the mainstream media news, do you feel a little twitch? Is there a tingle in your left hand? Is your jaw locked? We have the solution. Welcome to Reasonable Arguments, the podcast where thoughtful debate meets unfiltered fun. Coming to you from Sarasota, Florida, where your hosts, Jamie Miller and Jennifer Bash, make sense of the chaos. Together, we mix informed conservative commentary, playful banter, and just the right amount of nonsense to keep it entertaining. This is Reasonable Arguments, and now your hosts, husband and wife duo, Jamie and Jennifer.
Happy Sunday.
Hey, man.
How are you?
Gators won.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I was very concerned about that.
Well, it was a concerning game for all the entire game.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's get started. We have a good show today. You actually have no idea what we're talking about, so this will be absolutely entertaining.
It sounds like it's going to be more fun for you than for me.
I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. All right. So let me start off by saying, so March 22nd, Trump just issued a memo ordering the DOJ to go after lawyers who file lawsuits against the federal government, especially on hot button issues like immigration or elections. He wants them sanctioned, disciplined, and even stripped of security clearances. But let's talk about what happened before. Under Democratic administrations, we saw similar behavior. Obama's DOJ went after whistleblowers and journalists. Biden's DOJ targeted pro-life attorneys under the FACE Act, and Clinton and Obama both tried to rein in politically inconvenient lawyers and lobbyists. They just did it more quietly with fewer headlines. So why is this hypocritical? Because when the same people who were fine with quiet crackdowns, when it served their side, are now clutching their pearls and crying abuse of power when Trump does it. The only thing that's really changed is the target and the volume. All right, so let's jump into today's episode. So we are doing the top 10 most influential people in American politics in the last 50 years, and they are ranked in order.
Okay. Oh, you're going to give them to me.
Yes, I'm going to give them to you.
Okay. So,
we'll see
what's the
see
source?
if you agree.
What's the source?
I did Grok. I did a deep search on Grok.
Oh, okay. So
Okay.
AI. Okay.
AI.
We're doing the top 10 in the last 50 years. So that's until what? Before 1975.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. And they are ranked from 10 to 1. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So number 10, who do you think it is?
Alexander Haig.
No. George H.W. Bush. Okay. So, of course, he was the president from 1989 through 93 and the vice president from 81 through 89. So good things that he did. He led the Gulf War Coalition, liberating Kuwait with global support, showcasing U.S. leadership post-Cold War. Something bad that he did is he broke his no new taxes pledge, tanking his credibility and losing voter trust during a recession. And an ugly is the 1988 Willie Horton ad from his campaign exploited racial fears, leaving a nasty stain on his legacy. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I'd have to hear the other 9, but the no new taxes certainly cost him re-election, and he basically got bamboozled by Democrats to put in a tax package. So the Willie Horton ad is ridiculous because there was nothing non-factual about that ad, and so whether people want to call it racial, it was racially insensitive or whatever, we could have an argument about that. But it was a factual ad. And of course, he was at the height of his popularity 9 to 15 months into his presidency from the Kuwait War. And then the no new tax thing came out because Democrats, quote, wanted him to pay for the war.
Okay. All right. So number 9, any guesses?
If George Herbert Walker Bush was number 10.
And they're not all presidents.
Madeleine Albright.
No. Bernie Sanders. So his role, he was a U.S. Senator, presidential candidate from 2016 to 2020. A good thing about him was he pushed Medicare for all into Democratic mainstream, reshaping the party's progressive wing. Bad is his far left ideas scared off moderates, raising doubts about his electability in a general election. And his ugly is his 2016 campaign fallout fueled bitter infighting with fans crying rigged and pointing fingers at the DNC.
Well, there's no question he would have been the nominee for the Democratic Party in 2016 if Hillary Clinton and Debbie Wasserman Schultz didn't rig the election. And Democrats, this is why Democrats are hypocritical when they talk about, oh, elections aren't rigged. They're, 2020 conspiracy theories. And yet in 2016, they know darn good and well that Hillary rigged the rules. She maybe didn't rig the exact votes, but she certainly rigged the rules in the process and she rigged the debates. She received debate questions that others were not given from the Democrat National Committee. So Bernie Sanders has a reason to be mad at Democrats for sure. He is super liberal. He's dangerous. He has dangerous ideas that are not mainstream America. But I can agree that he is influential because he is if the Tea Party is the conservative part of the Republican Party, then Bernie Sanders is the liberal loony left of the Democrats. And so to the extent that that is becoming who Democrats are, that is Bernie Sanders. So he may even deserve, depending on who else is on the list, he may deserve to be higher.
Okay. Number 8, any guesses?
No.
Not any. Come on.
I haven't even, are the other two aren't even on the list, right?
No.
I'm going to say Colin Powell.
No.
He's not even on the list.
Newt Gingrich.
Newt Gingrich. I can go with Newt Gingrich.
Okay. So he was the Speaker of the House from 1995 through 1999. His good point is he masterminded the 1994 Republican Revolution, flipping Congress with the contract with America. The bad is he triggered government shutdowns in 95 and 96, which backfired and made him a punching bag for Clinton. And the ugly is he cheated on his wife while preaching family values, then got slapped with an ethics violation, hypocrisy at its finest.
Yeah, I mean, Newt Gingrich was a human being, and it's funny because I became a Republican because of Newt Gingrich. I switched parties because of Newt Gingrich. I campaigned for George Herbert Walker Bush in 1992, but I was still registered a Democrat. And it was the Newt Gingrich is probably the 93, 94 election somewhere it was prior to the 94 election, because that was the first year I campaigned for local Republicans in Sumter County. So, and Newt Gingrich was a big part of that. I remember after that, Karen Krause, who was my first win ever in politics, who ran for county commissioner in Sumter County, we went to an event with Cliff Stearns and Newt Gingrich up at Silver Springs State. It's now Silver Springs State Park, but at that time it was a tourist attraction. So Newt Gingrich has been a pretty, outside of Ronald Reagan and a few others, been a pretty guiding force in my life. And I was proud to have worked on his presidential campaign in 2012 and even helped him with a portion of his debate prep during one debate.
Okay. Any guesses for number 7?
Hillary Clinton.
No, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So her role was a Supreme Court justice from 1993 to 2020. The good is struck down male-only admissions at VMI in 1996, cementing her as a titan for gender equality. Bad is didn't retire under Obama, gambling her seat and letting Trump's pick flip the court rightward. Ugly, her death in 2020 sparked a political circus with Republicans ramming through Amy Coney Barrett pre-election.
Okay.
Comments?
I think there's, depending on who else is on the list, I think there's certainly she was one of the more influential liberals on the court during this time period, but I would say that even she wasn't the most influential woman on the U.S. Supreme Court during this time period, because that would be Sandra Day O'Connor.
Okay. Number 6, any guesses?
Well, we bounced around. I'm going to say Mitch McConnell.
No, Nancy Pelosi.
Nancy Pelosi should probably be higher.
So Nancy Pelosi was Speaker of the House from 2007 through 2011, and then 2019 through 2023. Good was she rammed the Affordable Care Act through Congress, a game changer for health care access, depending on how you look at it. Bad, her hardcore partisanship turned her into a lightning rod, alienating anyone right of center. And ugly, caught getting her hair done maskless in 2020 during COVID lockdowns. Rules for thee, not for me.
Well, there's no question that Nancy Pelosi is one of the purest and strongest politicians. Like I said, depending on who the top five are, Nancy Pelosi could be number one, to be honest with you. She is probably the most influential negative impact on our country during this time period. But if we're just talking about the 10 most influential politicians of the last 50 years, Nancy Pelosi is definitely one of them. Now, she's hypocritical. She was vicious, and certainly one of the most partisan people Washington, D.C. has ever seen.
Okay. Number 5.
Okay, so we bounced around. Let's see. We have to be getting close to Bill Clinton.
No, Joe Biden. So his role was president from 2021 through 2025, vice president 2009 through 2017. Good is he signed the 1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, pumping cash into COVID-ravaged pockets. Bad, inflation spiked under his watch, hitting wallets hard and fueling Bidenomics backlash. And the ugly, classified docs turned up at his house in 2023, sparking probes and hypocrisy claims after he bashed Trump for the same.
There's no way Joe Biden belongs on this list if George Herbert Walker Bush is number 10. There's no question Biden is a failed president. He's only going to be remembered influentially as a negative influence on American foreign and domestic policy both. And that's really hard to do. Even George Herbert Walker Bush was loved internationally after his presidency, even though domestically he carried the weight of that no new taxes flip-flop for the rest of his life. But Joe Biden is nowhere near the top 5 influential politicians in the last 50 years. Nowhere close.
I never said politicians. I said people
But,
in American politics.
Yeah, he's not even close to the top 10. He's probably not in the top 25. He was that bad of a president. History will not treat him fondly. And look at what Donald Trump has had to do just in these first 60 days to try to clean up his mess. And everybody fighting him tooth and nail. And for what? To hold on to some. And the real problem is that Joe Biden has now tainted the Obama legacy. And so Obama, and that's what Democrats are truly upset about. They know that Joe Biden extended Obama's legacy, and Joe Biden was such a bad president that history will show that it reflects poorly on Barack Obama.
Okay. Number 4.
Barack Obama.
Trump.
No way. Okay.
So, of course, his role is president from 2017 through 2021, and now from 2025 forward. The good, he locked in 3 Supreme Court justices, flipping the bench right and axing Roe versus Wade. Bad, pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement.
That's not bad.
Thumbing his nose at the planet and global allies.
That's not even true.
Ugly, egged on the January 6th Capitol riot, got impeached twice, and still calls it a beautiful day. Chaos personified.
They were illegal impeachments and based on erroneous information that Nancy Pelosi knew was erroneous. And she still she basically committed treason trying to overthrow the United States president using information she knew was bad, and still charged forward with the attempted overthrow of a United States president. I mean, we've seen nothing like that in American history, and certainly Nancy Pelosi will be remembered as someone who tried to overthrow the United States government. And Donald Trump, I'm fine with Donald Trump at number 4. If you're looking at the last 50 years, because he's it seems like Grok is giving us the most recent examples of the last 50 years. But but he certainly was an economic powerhouse. He was influential. Prior to him becoming president, he was influential in a lot of political campaigns on both sides of the aisle. And in that regard, he maybe should have been higher, but 4 might be in the right spot, depending on who the next 3 are.
Okay. So number 3.
I'm not going to like it, but it should be Barack Obama, but it's knowing how Grok is doing this, it's probably Ronald Reagan.
It is Barack Obama.
Yeah, good.
So his role was president from 2009 through 2017. The good is he passed Obamacare, getting millions insured despite a brutal political slugfest. The bad is he let the NSA run wild with surveillance creeping out privacy hawks and regular folks alike. And the ugly is the Benghazi attack in 2012 killed 4 Americans, and the messy aftermath turned into a political shitstorm.
I mean, Barack Obama probably doesn't even belong on the list of the top 10, just because of the short nature in which he served. He served for less than 4 years in the Illinois State Senate. He served less than 4 years in the U.S. Senate. He was elected president twice. But when you start looking at the breadth of 50 years, he's a blip on the screen. He was only in politics about a dozen of those, 14 maybe at the most. So I think there's probably some people who are not going to end up on this list who were much more influential. I mean, you could throw Charlton Heston in there as the chairman of the NRA during this time period, as influential as Barack Obama, just because Heston was there for so long. But
is that considered political, though?
Sure, it's political. It's just not elected.
I didn't do elected.
The U.S. Supreme Court justice isn't elected, so you could argue that that's somebody like that Wayne LaPierre, who was the executive director and CEO of the NRA, served 20 something years in that role. Much longer than Barack Obama was in elected politics. Now, Barack Obama was president of the United States. He certainly was the Affordable Care Act, which was a huge expansion of government that it seems that people seem to look fondly upon when government overtakes industries. But that's certainly, and he was the first African-American president. So because of those reasons, he probably belongs on the list. 3 is probably a little high when you start talking about a list that includes 50.
Okay. Number 2?
In American politics, if we're going with Supreme Court justice, you maybe would have Chief Justice John Roberts there.
Bill Clinton.
Okay, so it's going to be Bill Clinton and Reagan. Okay.
So Clinton was president from 1993 through 2001. The good is he oversaw a booming economy with surpluses, jobs galore, and the 90s vibe everyone misses. Bad is he botched healthcare reform early on, leaving Hillary to take the heat and stalling momentum. And the ugly is the Monica Lewinsky affair led to impeachment. Sex lies and a stained dress took over his legacy.
So I do think that Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich deserve to be on this list because they were the last two really from opposing parties who worked together to balance the budget. And as we know, the last balanced budget was 1997. Last time we passed a budget was 1997. The last time it was balanced was 2001, which is basically Clinton's budget that went into the 2001 year that George W. Bush started going. I mean, it's kind of Bill Clinton, so I do think that Bill was a visionary. He was ahead of his time with the Hillary care. If they had done something a little bit different there, it probably would have been better for everybody instead of the Obama stuff. But the country just wasn't ready for the government takeover of healthcare. And I don't know that they were ready for it or we were ready for it under Obama either, but we certainly got it.
Okay. And number 1?
It has to be Reagan.
Has to be Reagan. Yes. He was president from 1981 through 1989. The good is he ended the Cold War with a mix of charm and steel, tearing down the Soviet wall without firing a shot. The bad was the Iran-Contra saw his team sell arms to Iran and fund rebels, a scandal that torched his clean image. And ugly was the 2019 tapes caught him tossing racist jabs with Nixon, tough to square with the great communicator myth.
Tell me the Nixon part again.
2019 tapes caught him tossing racist jabs with Nixon, tough to square with the great communicator myth.
I don't know where that came from, but listen, Ronald Reagan, of course, his Life magazine looks over my shoulder each and every day, and was the reason why I got involved with politics. And the real reason I got involved with politics, and then Newt Gingrich kind of pushed me along the way. So Ronald Reagan was a huge influence in my life politically. And the fact that he ended the Cold War without firing a shot should give people hope for what's happening with Russia and Ukraine right now.
Okay. So I asked ChatGPT the same question. So I asked Chat the top 10 most influential people in American politics in the last 50 years. So do you have any guesses?
So I would
for
have
Chat?
to, you almost have to include Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, I would think, just
No.
because they were so influential on American culture, which included politics. They weren't politicians, but both of those probably, or you can make the argument that either one of those belong on this list. You could go through the list of U.S. Supreme Court justices, Anthony Scalia and Clarence Thomas.
How about I give you number 10 and we'll go from there?
All right, why don't you just tell me?
All right, so number 10 is AOC.
She's done nothing, and having a bunch of Twitter followers certainly how, quite frankly, she could be included on the list for most influential politicians for the next 50 years. I think people take her for granted at their own peril, but certainly she doesn't belong on a list for anybody influential in politics over the last 50 years. She's done
Well,
nothing.
they said whether you love her or hate her tweet game has basically changed, leveraging social media and grassroots energy. She represents the rising progressive wing of the Democratic Party and speaks directly to the younger, more diverse voters. Also, she made a democratic socialism a household phrase without being chased out of Congress. So that's
But she may,
influence.
like I said, she may get run out of a rail over the next 10 years, but she may also be one of the most influential people in the upcoming 10 years. But certainly she's not even on the list of most influential politicians in the last 10 years.
Okay.
She's not served in leadership. I don't know that she's even been a chairman of a committee in Congress. If she has, it was a minor one. And, so she's not been influential over anything other than promoting herself.
Okay.
Now, so don't take her for granted. Don't take her for granted. But this list, she does not belong on.
Okay. Do you want to take a guess at number 9?
If she's on the list, I can't even imagine.
I figured. Okay. So number 9 is Karl Rove. So Karl Rove was the architect behind George W. Bush's campaigns and the GOP's early 2000 dominance. So he mastered data-driven strategy before it was cool and turned values voters into a winning coalition. Love or loathe him, he shaped the conservative playbook for decades.
Well, Karl deserves to be on the list because I have a picture of me and Karl on the wall. No, I put. Listen, I love Karl. Karl is one of those wonks who, if you're having a beer with, you immediately go to shots just to try to make the night interesting. I mean, because he is not that he's not interesting, but will completely bore you to death. He'll beat you to death with statistics. And he's just one of those guys. So my experience with Karl Rove was one of my first experience with Karl was the night they certified the election. And this is how anal Karl Rove was. I was the driver, and I don't think I've shared this with our listeners on our podcast before, but I was the driver. I drove Jim Baker to the press conference when Katherine Harris certified the election for George W. Bush after the recount. And so I'm on the phone with Karl, and Karl wants to know the exact second that Baker is showing up to the press conference. Secretary Baker showing up to the press conference. And I don't know what intern he had drive this thing, because I guarantee he made him drive it 100 times. And I get to a light. He's like, tell me if you make this light. I made the light. Okay, you're 32 seconds away. If I got caught, I don't know what the number was if I got caught by the light, but he knew that if I made that light, I was 32 seconds away. And I'm on the phone with him, and he's like, okay, you're 32 seconds away. Click, and he's gone. Like,
oh my God.
All right, so now he's going to go tell somebody, okay, Baker's showing up in 32 seconds. And by God, we were there in 32 seconds. Like he's that anal about every little thing he does. And it's, in that regard, if you were talking about the top 10 political consultants who impacted the last 50 years, Karl deserves to be on that list. Top 10 Americans, probably not.
Okay. Number 8 is Nancy Pelosi.
Okay.
So we've already talked about that. And this one, it says that she held the gavel with an iron grip and a killer wardrobe. Pelosi shepherded landmark legislation, Obamacare, kept her caucus in line through chaos, and proved that quiet power is
I
still
wonder
power.
how many men ChatGPT describes as with a killer wardrobe. I mean, it just goes to show you the bias of ChatGPT and how pathetic that even AI is treating women based upon their dress versus their accomplishments. And I think every woman should be offended by that description by ChatGPT.
Well, and I asked ChatGPT one of the questions because you could just tell it came back so leaning towards one side. And I said, do you have a center? And it came back and it said, you have to realize that I'm built by people and by reading and things like that. So it's really just on who the programmers are. So, which is kind of funny. All right. So number 7 is Ronald Reagan. So again, going into
So the list is over now, because if you mention Reagan and you mention anyone above him, you're probably wrong. So the next 6 are going to be wrong.
All right. Number 6.
Like this exercise, though. This is kind of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So number 6. Any guesses?
No idea.
Okay. At Barack Obama.
Okay.
Number 5. He's new. This is a new one, and it is a he.
Okay. I'm
not a president.
Going to say Rupert Murdoch.
No. It is Steve Bannon.
No way belongs on the list. Steve Bannon's below Karl Rove, in my opinion, just because, Karl's been doing it longer. But
well, let's talk about who Steve Bannon is first. So Bannon dragged populism, nationalism, and the alt-right into the political mainstream through the Breitbart and later his role in Trump's campaign administration. He helped rewrite the GOP's DNA and set fire to the traditional conservative script.
Yeah, so if we're talking about the next 20 years, Bannon could be laying the foundation for what becomes conservatism for the next 20 years. And he could certainly belong on that list. Like Karl, he could belong on a list of top 10 political consultants of the last 50 years. But most influential Americans in politics,
I didn't say Americans. I said the 10 most influential people in American politics.
Okay. So Margaret Thatcher could make the list. She should have been on the last list, certainly before, Bernie Sanders, but, or Ruth Bader Ginsburg. But, if we're talking about just top 10 influential people on American politics, Margaret Thatcher had an incredible influence on American politics during this time period. Because without Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan is acting alone. It was that team that took down the Gorbachev and the wall in Berlin and defeated communism or the Cold War. So,
okay. So number 4 was not on the previous list. It is a she.
Hillary.
Hillary, yes. So why she matters is she was the first lady, senator, secretary of state, and first woman to clinch a major party nomination for president. Her impact is undeniable. Hillary's policies, controversies, and public persona have shaped conversations on gender, power, and trust in politics for decades.
I agree. I think Hillary does belong on this list. They sold Bill and Hillary Clinton as a team, and for the most part, politically, they acted as a team. And like you said, she was in either first lady or elected status or nominee for 25, over a period of 25 of these 50 years. And so she's been very influential.
Okay. Number 3 is someone that you mentioned before. He was not on the list before, but it was someone you mentioned.
Oh boy. The Chief Justice?
No, Mitch McConnell.
Mitch McConnell. Yes, Mitch McConnell. There's a couple others, of course, AI is geared towards the most recent history, so we haven't we haven't really had anyone except for Ronald Reagan, I think, from the period of 1975 to 1992, or 19. Well, you had Herbert Walker Bush in '88, but Mitch McConnell was. Tell us about Mitch McConnell.
So he matters because he's cold, calculating, ruthlessly effective. McConnell turned the Senate into a conservative stronghold by prioritizing judicial appointments, especially Supreme Court justices, over pretty much everything else. His moves will outlive all of us, legally speaking.
But Mitch McConnell was, I think, for longevity and for the reasons you mentioned, he was majority leader. I don't know if you said for how long, but he was majority, or he was the leader of the Republican Party in the Senate for probably 20 or more years. And like you said, he certainly had a huge influence across presidential terms. And so he was incredibly influential during the past 50 years.
Okay. Number 2. Any guesses?
Let's see. Gene Hackman.
Donald Trump.
Okay, Donald Trump.
So love him or swear every time he's mentioned. Trump redefined modern American politics. He bulldozed norms, rallied millions, ignited populism, and turned politics into primetime reality TV. He showed the power of brand, policy, and Twitter tradition, still shaping the narrative.
Well, yeah, I think Donald Trump probably does belong on the list because he was somebody who was mentioned as a presidential contender every time there was a non-incumbent running. So since 1980, people forget that he has flown that trial balloon each presidential cycle, whether it was just to get his name in there, or maybe to sell a building. Who knows why?
Well, wasn't Oprah the first one to mention it?
Well, it was actually Bart Simpson. I think I was the second one in 2011 to predict that he would become president.
No, talking about when she was interviewing him when he was much younger, saying that, any thoughts of being president one day?
Yeah, so he's certainly from the time he was young was considering a run for president. So, and like I said, he supported Republicans and Democrats alike throughout that period, and and not necessarily, Christy Todd Whitman in New Jersey, which was a Republican governor, a very moderate Republican governor comes to mind. I believe he was supportive of, and it's he probably belongs on the list.
Okay, and number 1.
Have I mentioned them before, or were they on the other list?
They were on the other list.
Newt.
Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
So why he's
you can
number
make the
1
argument, I guess,
is he is the king of charisma. Clinton pulled the Democratic Party toward the center, survived impeachment, and helped usher in the 24-hour news cycle scandal era. His policies like welfare reform, NFATA, and criminal justice reshaped both the economy and political landscape for decades. He was the bridge from the Cold War to the New World, and politically and culturally, and he played the saxophone on Arsenio. That's influence.
Yeah, I don't think Bill Clinton deserves the number 1 spot. He deserves to be there. He deserves to be ahead of Hillary, but probably just one spot a bit ahead of Hillary. And he's certainly not the most influential. He wasn't, you can't think of. I wrote a book called, American.
It's on your dresser.
Yeah,
Look, yeah.
American Speeches That Changed History. Jesus.
Very influential book.
Very influential. American Speeches That Changed History, and sold dozens of copies. Sold a few more than that, but still. The American Speeches That Changed History, and he doesn't have a speech in there, and he didn't oversee a wartime president. He certainly had the opportunity to kill Osama bin Laden and didn't take it. And then we know that George W. Bush had to clean up that mess. And so you could argue that I think that's certainly a very biased pick. It would be interesting to see and not being involved in politics, just kind of from the outside looking in, who do you think belongs on that list?
Oh God, I couldn't even.
Who was missing from the list?
I couldn't even begin to think about who would belong on this list, especially in the last 50 years. I I couldn't even begin to.
The interesting thing to me is that it really didn't take a deep dive. These are kind of superficial folks that are in the news, and you really there certainly are lobbyists like Wayne LaPierre who have been very, and there's dozens of lobbyists who have had a 40-year career who've been more influential over a 40 or 50-year period than anyone on these lists.
Yeah.
And so to not include them, or to include captains of industry who impacted politics, probably could throw in a couple of governors or two, certainly some U.S. senators. The only out of the 20 people, I know it wasn't 20 people, but out of the 20 slots, there was only one slot taken by a U.S. Supreme Court justice. You probably could include some other U.S. Supreme Court justices on the list.
Well, I actually started this going down the rabbit hole with Jessica Aber, that was found dead today, the attorney that had been appointed by Biden. And she resigned after Trump was inauguration, and she was 43 years old and found dead today. So I started down that rabbit hole. And of course, there's not that much information on there. And I had done the top 10 controversial people, and that was definitely an interesting list. So we may do that next week. But
now, to be fair, you didn't share any of this with me.
I did not.
If you had shared it with me, I probably would have come up with a top 10 list that was missing.
Yeah.
I also don't want to go off the cuff and come up with 10 and miss people, because there certainly were people behind the scenes who, Mike Murphy, for instance, who's incredibly influential on the political consultant list for sure, did all of the Bush's campaigns, both brothers, Arnold Schwarzenegger's campaign out in California. So you start taking somebody who has done the media for all those influential people in politics. You're like, wow, that might be enough to be on the top 10 list, not just being the person, but the person behind a dozen of these people. And so you just really kind of have to, it depends on how you want the perspective you want to take on it.
Yeah. Well, I think so. On our midweek podcast, going forward for a couple of weeks, we're going to break down the Constitution, and we're going to break down the Bill of Rights, just to give everybody a refresher course on history or whatever class we learned it in. And then maybe next week we'll do the top controversial people in American politics.
Well, and we still have 2 more segments of our series on
immigration
legal and illegal immigration that we're booking. And we certainly still have Ed Rollins still in the queue, who rescheduled. So we got a lot coming up this spring. So that's
all right. Well, thanks everybody, and we will see you next time.
This has been Reasonable Arguments, News and Nonsense. There is so much BS on the mainstream media news, but you knew that. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon. See you next time as husband and wife duo Jamie and Jennifer keep it real on Reasonable Arguments,